slide, this was one of our most exciting moments. We were like, wow, this is amazing, because we know that play is super important for children for so many reasons, but they helped us connect the play process to the writing and reading process. And so when children play, the first thing that they do is they have to generate an idea. They have to decide what they're going to play. When kids write, that's also the first thing that they have to do. And then in reading, they're deciding, what am I going to read about? What do I need to learn about? Next, students are planning their play. They have to set up their play. They have to decide, who are you going to be? What are we going to do? How are we going to do this? And in writing, they're doing the same thing. They're planning and organizing before they actually write. And in reading, they're having to keep track as they're reading, keep track of the text, and gain that, and remember what it is they're reading for. Then the play starts, but they have to do those things first. So when they're playing, we're asking students, what are you going to make?
What are you going to do?
Yeah, what are you going to play? Who are you going to be? They're acting out. And in writing, they're doing that with the details. They're writing the details. And in reading, they're having to, determine importance, infer, make connections. And then the final step of play and writing is revising. How are you going to make it better? And with reading, they're having to monitor and make corrections. So, that was just
Like
really
when they
cool.
put this up, we were all like, oh,
Yes.
because it just made it all
Yeah.
make sense. Like we knew all these things, but then to see it connected and to make the play so purposeful,
Yes.
it really made an impact on us, and it was something we could take back right away and just be so much more intentional about each of these components.
And we're really talking to students about it as well.
Yeah.
So they're understanding that process for themselves. So the importance of play, we just talked about the connection to the literacy development. With cognitive development, students are having to, learn to focus, maintain their attention, communicate. Social emotional learning, I think, is what most people know the most of about play, is taking turns, sharing. It just goes on and on, having to be flexible.
We were talked about, one of the speakers just spoke about how these are the soft skills that are going to be so important going on. They did like a interview with Google, like, what are the most important things you like of your employees? And none of it was like they really knew how to code. It was, did they know how to collaborate and cooperate,
Be
and
flexible.
and communicate their ideas and sharing of ideas. And so it starts really young, learning those skills.
I think we're probably getting close to our 10
Yeah.
minutes, so we're going to hurry.
Yeah.
So we just wanted to tell you a little bit about our plans to implement our new learning from the Teachers College Reading and Writing Project and the Pre-K Institute. So I'm so fortunate because I have these two amazing teachers who are willing to take on trying and piloting some of these different components. So like the emergent storybook reading, they've already started a little bit this year. They come running to my office with videos of their kids like, look, they're reading the book to us. We're going to try out next year a more systematic, okay, we're going to first start with emergent storybook reading, then we're going to do more interactive read-alouds, shared reading, shared writing, and introduce the components. As they try them in their classrooms, we're also going to share with the pre-K team. And then the idea would be that in the year after that, then more of the pre-K teachers who are interested and invested will be able to take on some of these new methods. And so it's not really like a huge earth-shattering change to how we're teaching literacy, but it's just like a nice framework that wraps it up really neatly for us and makes sure that teachers are really staying focused on those authentic literacy experiences in the classroom. So we're just so appreciative of our PTA and our fearless leader, Sarah, for letting us experience this amazing professional learning. So thank you so much.
Thanks for sharing. Thank you.
Thank you.
Suddenly, they all clapped. All right.
I guess we'll move on to the retiree breakfast.
Yes. Who's running that? David? All right.
members of the board, superintendent duty, my coworkers and educators and guests. It's my privilege to introduce our retirees for this year. We have a short list of 9 employees that are retiring. They come from different positions within the district. Gives a great pleasure to speak to them. Several of them were unable to come tonight, so I'm going to start out with just an introduction of their name, and we always try to get some feedback from their peers and whatnot about them and read a brief statement about each one of them. I'll start out with John Burton. John Burton has served here at City Schools of Decatur since 1983. He has 36 years of service. John served on a custodial crew here for that whole time. John's co-workers and his supervisor said that John is a quiet and behind-the-scenes man. One of the endearing characteristics of John is that he is a dedicated employee and has always taken great pride in the cleanliness of his school, and he could always be counted on whenever it was needed extra work to be done. Secondly is Carlin Snodgrass. Carlin is a food and nutrition worker, and she has been with the City Schools of Decatur since January of 2003. I've interacted with Carlin on many occasions, and I can assure you that the comments that I'm about to read are completely accurate. Carlin is a dog lover, and she is definitely a pro at winning radio contests. Every time she wins, she lets us know, and Jeannie Wynn's very, very much aware of her having won. And her most famous, in her mind, star is Jennifer Nettles, and she was jealous when I got to go see Jennifer Nettles. Carlin's supervisor says that she is very dependable and has always been willing to get the job done as well. Rochelle Childs is also a food and nutrition worker, retiring this year after service of 22 years to City Schools of Decatur. One of the things that was very positive about Rochelle is she always has a smile on her face, and she has a very positive attitude, a whatever it takes attitude. In the technology area, we have Jack Brantley. Jack has only been with us for 5 years. He was a part-time technology worker serving College Heights. He has earned the nickname Mr. Jack at College Heights, and Jack's been very dependable and very supportive of the efforts at College Heights with their technology needs. Also retiring from College Heights this year is Nedra Perry. Nedra is a pre-K paraprofessional, and she has served since 2001 for 17 years, serving the students, happily serving the students' pre-K needs at College Heights. And I'll let Jenna Black come up and speak to her retiree.
Miss Andrea Owens was not able to be with us tonight, but she started out in City Schools of Decatur 7 years ago in the school nutrition department. And then 4 years ago, indicated to Allison that she really wanted to make a change. And Allison very kindly called me and said, "I've got the perfect person for you." And so Miss Andrea came over to us and has been in our newborn room ever since, taking care of our youngest children. And she's quiet, compassionate, always there, always does what needs to be done. But the thing that stands out to me the most about Miss Andrea, and knowing that this was probably going to be her last year, we had a teen mom, a senior in high school for the first time in 7 years at Decatur High School. And Miss Andrea did an amazing job of mentoring this young mother, who is a fantastic mom, has a wonderful game plan for what she's going to do with the rest of her life, lots of support at home. But she knew at school every day that she had Miss Andrea to help her parent, and it was just wonderful to see that. She promises she'll come back and visit, and she says that she'll be on mine and Sarah's sub list, so I'm excited about that. That's nice.
I'm excited if she wants to be on the sub list. I will ask Dwayne Sproul to come up and introduce the Decatur High School retirees, and some of them are here this evening. As Dwayne introduces you, if you will come up, we have a gift of appreciation for you. Jeannie will hand out, and Courtney, are you making pictures? Okay, and Courtney will make a picture with you all. Okay?
I just want to say Ms. Williams has a school leadership team meeting simultaneously, so she's there. Our first retiree, I think John Hudson, is not here tonight, correct? Had to cancel last minute. He's a math teacher, began in August 2005, and has 14 years of CSD service. I guess what I'll say about Mr. Hudson is that anytime there was an issue with a student with Mr. Hudson, you could always say about Mr. Hudson, he was fair and consistent. and that there were some issues at times with students, but it was never you could never say it was an issue of race or boy or girl. It was just when Mr. Hudson had an issue with a student, he would always take the time to sit down with the parents and the students, outline expectations, and just be so professional in those meetings, and everybody would leave satisfied with a resolution, and rarely, if not ever, would we have to go back again and have a time to kind of revisit that with Mr. Hudson. So Mr. Hudson, we do appreciate his service of 14 years. All right. The next are retiring together. I'm going to call them up together because they are a team. They are partners. And so it's only appropriate if I call Dr. Kara Cassell and Carrie Williams up at the same time. Dr. Cassell has been with the City Schools of Decatur since August 1991, which is 28 years of service. She is the consummate professional. There's no doubt about it. She's ran as her duty, our writing center. And so we had to replace her with 2 or 3 people to fill her shoes in the writing center. And I just always, in my time when I was evaluated those years, it was like, I would go in class and really, what could I tell her about teaching? Not much. So it was always a pleasure to be in her classroom, and she made sure that every kid was engaged in her classroom during that period. Dr. Kara Cassell, thank you. And when you say opposites attract, that would be Carrie Williams and Dr. Cassell. Absolutely. My fondest memories of Carrie Williams is homecoming and her just having that power to line those cars up at homecoming and have that bullhorn and just get it going, and we knew we was in good hands. At times, many years recently, we haven't seen each other as much because of her status with coming and going. But I have always appreciated Carrie Williams. Thank you for your service since 1997, 22 years. Thank you.
That's okay. I'm getting myself out.
Do you want to be in it? Photo bomb.
Photo bomber.
Thank you very much. That's our list of 9 people for this year. And please join me one more time as a round of applause for these educators and these support staff. It takes a lot of people to make the school district run. It takes a lot of people supporting teachers that come passionately every day to serve students, and we couldn't do it without the benefit of all of these employees. So again, thank you very much for each of you.
And your parting gift is you have to stay the rest of the board meeting. No, just kidding. We will not be offended if you get up and leave.
Because there's a party to be had.
Yes, exactly. That's right. That's right.
Is that it for our spotlight?
Yes.
Okay, the next item on the agenda is public comment. Do you have the list?
We have 3 people.
We have 3 people. Andrew Lewis is first. Claire Schnecksnyder is second, and Mauli third. Claire asked if she could do a video or something like that. Have you set that up? Okay. So Mr. Lewis.
Good evening. My name is Andrew Lewis. My wife and I have lived in Decatur for 18 years. We have a son, at Decatur High School and a daughter at Renfro. In the 1987 movie Wall Street, Michael Douglas as Gordon Gekko gave an insightful speech where he said, "Greed, for a lack of a better word, is good." In essence, Gordon Gekko is saying, if the means achieve the end, then the means are good. Those are not the words that I live by. Those are not the words that this community lives by. And when actions by our elected officials conflict with the values of our community, those actions must be called out and rebuked. The Decatur Board of Education paid a powerful conservative lobbyist and the former fraternity brother of our governor $10,000 to veto Senate Bill 53. This piece of legislation was supported by not only every member of the DeKalb delegation of the Georgia General Assembly, it passed the Georgia House and Senate by a combined 222 to nothing. These actions certainly give the impression that we, the city of Decatur, the most progressive community in our state, are hypocritical to our societal values when we are directly impacted. Senate Bill 53 was the product of several years of effort, including a Senate study committee this past year, attempting to resolve these matters between school districts. But the hard work of this Senate study committee, which included representatives from Decatur, was upended by this board in the waning days of the process. Should Decatur give a blank about the 100,000 students of DeKalb County? When answering this question, the Decatur Board of Education apparently answered, "Those students aren't our students, and we have only ourselves to worry about." This cavalier attitude undermines the greater societal good that this community prides itself on. The Decatur Board of Education has a responsibility to the students and citizens of Decatur. I respect that incredible responsibility. But should the actions of this board to address our needs come at the expense of our neighbors? In my opinion, it should not. And I expect the vast majority of Decatur citizens would feel similar. The mission of City Schools of Decatur is we will build the foundation for all children to be their best, achieve their dreams, and make the world a better place. Please ask yourself a question. Do your actions match our mission? Thank you.
Claire Schneck-Snyder.
Good evening. I just wanted to report to you all on some work we've been doing at Renfro on a composting and recycling project. Over the last 3 weeks, we have done a program in partnership with the Center for Sustainability at Agnes Scott College, and students from a class at Agnes Scott College have been coming into Renfro and have audited our garbage and weighed it and looked at what it's made up of. And then 3 weeks ago, we started composting and recycling, and parents helped to separate out the trash, and we composted food and napkins and plastics, cans, and milk cartons, and then the rest of the trash. And we were able to, we started off with 40 bags of trash every day over the 3 lunch periods at Renfro. Everything, even our compostable trays, were going into trash bags. And now, after separating it all out, we are down to 3 bags of trash a day. That is an incredible change. And the kids are participating in doing it now, and it's almost a good thing. I've still been there every day, but we have a quick video that one of a City of Decatur parents made that I just wanted to share with you guys. They're cute kids. It's on Facebook, and it's really gone well. And our hope is that we can roll this out at all schools in August. I think it's highly doable, and it's such a huge, making such a huge impact on the amount of trash that we're throwing away. And then I want to change gears just really quick and invite everybody to come to Decatur dinner on August 25th. We hope to have 100 dinners in one night here in Decatur with over 1,000 people. We have, it's a conversation on race and the changes that need to occur in our city and in our school district in order to make sure that everybody has an equal opportunity to achieve, and that we can live together and hopefully lead by example here in Decatur. You can sign up at decaturdinners.com. We're looking for hosts. We have over 60 actors who are going to perform a piece that was written just for this. And I think it's an extraordinary opportunity. We had some dinners on April 28th, and some of the members of the board were able to be a part of that. And we have a lot of people signed up ready to go on August 25th. So I hope you'll consider that. Thank you.
Ollie.
Good evening. Often we come to raise issues that may appear on their face to be negative. Today, we wanted to just acknowledge the opportunity to work with the district as Beacon Hill on the PBIS panel discussion last week. And so I think it's important that we acknowledge that was a well-attended, very informational. We have a lot of questions that have yet to be answered that we will work very closely with Maggie to get out so that the community can be aware. But I just wanted to acknowledge that the work continues. Some of it is more collaborative, some of it is at times seemingly confrontational, but when it's collaborative, I think we should speak to that as well. And I also, again, appreciate Tasha and Garrett for being present at that meeting. It says a lot. I think it sends a message to not only the parents, but to our young people that this is something that, we're hopeful will help us go in the right direction. The last thing is, clearly, some of the parents who have not been engaged with Beacon Hill don't understand that we don't believe PBIS is the end-all to be-all. It is not going to solve the achievement gap. It's not going to address everything that we have been advocating for and working with the district on. And so there is a ton of other work to be done. We meet every third Tuesday right at Epster. And so we're encouraging those parents who would rather comment and talk about it on Facebook to come to our meeting and engage with community, and so that they can understand and not, just talk about it from the safety of their homes, but actually engage in the, at times, uncomfortable work of figuring out how we move forward and how everyone can have an equitable, diverse educational experience here in the city of Decatur. So thank you all, and we look forward to discussing other issues going forward. Thank you.
Thank you.
That's it for public comment. And now the superintendents.
My only comment is to thank Beacon Hill. They came up with the idea of doing this panel discussion, and we thought it was a fantastic idea. We appreciate the opportunity to do the partnership. I'm really sorry that I wasn't able to be there, but I've heard great things from a lot of people, both those who participated and those who attended. And I look forward to us getting those questions answered and getting more positive information out there and accurate information so people know what PBIS is all about. So thank you very much for getting that organized. Really appreciate it.
And now it's the chair's report. I have a fairly long list of items, and so I'll try to be brief. And hopefully you guys will let me know if I missed something. I will start with Senate Bill 53, and I want to extend the thanks of the school board to Governor Kemp for vetoing that bill. It was a bad bill. It was bad for Decatur. And we opposed it because it's a value of this school system that all children in the city of Decatur should attend a Decatur school. It's that simple. This bill would have changed that. It would have made 2 Decaturs, where some attend our schools and some weren't allowed to. We don't think that'd be good for our community. I think it'd change what Decatur is, and that's why we opposed this bill. It's also a value of this school board to engage in constructive community engagement. There is not a policy or program that we advocate on this board that we don't do our darndest to reach out to the stakeholders, to engage with the stakeholders, to find out how a proposed policy or program would affect them, and to get their views on the matter, and to change course if that's what we need to do in order to balance the interests of all the people affected by the things that we do. And I understand, Mr. Lewis, that annexations present issues, and I understand that there needs to be a balance between the interests of DeKalb County school system and the city of Decatur school system. But the way you achieve that balance is to reach out, pick up the telephone, have a conversation, invite us to the conversation, invite us to sit down and negotiate a compromise. But that didn't happen. What happened in this case is that we found out about a bill that apparently the DeKalb County school system had been working on for years, but without talking to us. It was a bill that directly affected 2 school systems. That's not a hard list of contacts to make, but we didn't receive any contact. We found out about Senate Bill 53 when it passed, the day it passed the Senate. When we made our concerns known to the representatives in the House, they dismissed them. Now, if I pass a policy, if this board passes a policy, and it turns out we're surprised at the reaction of stakeholders affected by it, if that's surprise, I consider that a fault of this board, that we didn't do the work that we needed to do in terms of public engagement to make sure that we had a good bill. If that happens, I'm not going to be surprised if the people affected by that bad bill do what they need to do to get it vetoed, and that's what we did. So I think we did the right thing for the Decatur. I regret the situation, but I do not regret our actions. And so I do thank Governor Kemp for recognizing that this was a bad bill and for vetoing it. The rest of the comments are a little happier. First, Decatur High School has recognized several students who've been named National Merit Scholars. Sydney Balcom and Beacon Floyd. Now, it's unclear, are they finalists or have they been recognized as?
I don't know the details, do you know?
They've got the scholarship. It's a really great honor. So these students are part of the 2,500 National Merit $2,500 scholarship winners chosen from a talent pool of more than 15,000 finalists in the 2019 scholarship program. It's truly a great accomplishment. Another great accomplishment, the Decatur High School baseball team is in the Final Four, the state semifinals, for the first time since 1948. Wow. And are they playing now? Yeah.
Right now.
All right. Winona Park students are making a better world. The 3rd grade students participated in the EL Education Better World Day. This is a day that's dedicated for students to help make local and global communities better. Our students learned about the indigenous Quechua culture of Otavalo, Ecuador. In the Quechua community, there's a fear that the culture is dying and being forgotten. Our students held a market day where they sold goods and made money to raise money to send to a museum in Ecuador to help preserve that culture. Another championship, our Westchester Bike Dudes were named the Safe Routes to School Champion of the Year for the Metro Atlanta, Safe Routes to School Metro Atlanta Champions of the Year. It says here that on Georgia Walk and Roll Day, Westchester consistently has a 60% participation rate, which is really terrific, given the challenges of that school, and that's in big part to these parents. I wanted to thank Mr. Davis and the Beacon Hill Alliance for the PBIS conference. I regret that I couldn't attend it. I had to. I was at my son's graduation, so I was called away. But otherwise, I would have been there. But I understand from the board members who attended that it was a really great event, and we're very appreciative to you all for putting it on, or for having the initiative to put it on. Likewise, I wanted to repeat Ms. Schneck-Snyder's invitation or call to sign up for a Chicago dinner. A Chicago-style Decatur dinner. So go to decaturdinners.com. And this next one is on August 25. I think a number of us participated in the dinners that were held, I think, 2 weeks ago, but in any event, sometime in the past, and found it to be a really valuable experience. Very good discussion and a good diverse group to have it with. And it's exactly the kind of discussion that we need to be having community-wide throughout Decatur on a sustained basis. So sign up for that and sign up to host if you can. There was a special education awards banquet that someone's going to have to fill in a detail about.
So we have the DEF Celebration of Excellence banquet Thursday night, and then 2 weeks from tomorrow is the DHA Excellence Awards right next door.
And there's one more here. So the DEF Celebration of Excellence. We wanted to thank DEF. DEF also hosted a fundraiser for Zara's Art Foundation, I think, which is a art integration program. The fundraiser was on May 9th, but I understand that it was a good one and a great program. I also wanted to thank Claire for that recycling program. I think that that's really very important, and I've always been concerned that we don't model the behavior that we actually want our kids to have. And so I'm very gratified that that's happening. Thank you. That's all my comments, but I probably missed something.
You mentioned basketball, correct?
I did not.
Oh, I thought it was, baseball's been in the semifinals
Yeah.
before the last 48, since 1948. They've got all the plaques hanging on the walls for like the last 3 or 4 years.
Top four.
Mm-hmm. So,
What's going on here?
Dwayne,
We're getting contradictory
No.
information.
this is it. I'm wrong.
But they made it to the last round, not this round, since 1948.
Okay. I'm still wrong.
They made it to the final eight, but not to the final four.
Okay.
Anything else? Okay. So that's the chair's report, and next we'll move on to the consent items. Excuse me. Do we have a motion to approve, do we have a motion to approve the consent items?
So moved.
Second.
Okay, we've got the items which I'll read are Romanet 1, the personnel report, 2, the school nutrition report, 3, the financial reports, 4, the transportation capital lease and buses, and 5, the RFP 19-006, CM at-risk, RMS Garden, and ROTC Park. Do we have we already have a motion. So all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All right, so the consent items pass unanimously. Next, we have, looks like 2 informational reports.
I'm wondering if maybe we should do the equity spotlight first. I assume that's what the kids are here for, and maybe let them get out of here before Billy goes on and on about Tally. Just kidding. Is that okay? You guys okay with
No
that?
objection to
Oh,
that.
sure, yeah, of
Okay.
course.
All right, let's jump to the students. Sorry, I didn't notice that earlier. I hadn't noticed the order earlier, but we could do that.
I'm going to minimize my time to maximize their time. On March 28th, us 8 left for Japan, and we stayed until April the 6th, and it was due to Mrs. Fry's relationship with the Georgia Economic Council. And so we kind of picked this trip up at the last minute, and we ensured Dr. Duty and Dr. Furman and Dr. Huddleston that we'd make sure that the trip reflected Decatur's values and the diversity of Decatur. And it took a little work to do that, and I want to definitely commend Ms. Williams, Wes Hatfield, Cheryl Nomius, the DEF, and Deborah Ledoux, along with Ms. Fry, for their work behind the scenes to make sure all these students could go. And a special thanks goes out to John Lewis's office. Without his support and getting us a court date, we wouldn't have been able to get a student a passport to go on this trip. So thank you, John Lewis's office. And the kids have practiced up, and they presented at Renfro already. So they're gonna take that hour-long presentation from Renfro and squeeze it into about 8 minutes. Thank y'all.
And just real quick, by the way, I'm Melissa Fry. The purpose of the trip was, it was funded or planned by the Japan America Society of Georgia and funded by Gen J. And the purpose was to bring Japan and Georgia closer together to promote economic and cultural cooperation between the two. All right.
Don't be nervous.
Hello, I'm Asia. I'm Brooke. I'm Ella.
I'm Shemaya.
I'm Max. And I'm Zach.
In this presentation, we'll be talking about where we went, what we did, and what we learned.
So first we went to Tokyo, and in Tokyo, if you can see in the bottom right corner, we went to the Tokyo Skytree, which is the tallest tower in the world. It's about 640 meters high. We got to go 540 meters up, so it was really high up. And then we also went to Shibuya Crossing, which is in the top corner. That's the busiest intersection in the world. We saw the Imperial Palace, which is in the bottom left corner. That is where the Emperor and Empress live. And we also got to see what's right in the middle. Those are some Shinto weddings, so that was really interesting.
The next place we went to was Kamakura, which we saw the Great Buddha, and we also went to the Hasekanon Temple, and each of those little statues represent the god of mercy, and why they have the hats, they're supposed to keep a miscarried child warm in the afterlife.
Oh, wow.
After we went to Kamakura, we then went over to Yokohama, and the first place that we visited was the Nissan factory. The Nissan factory is the largest factory in all of Japan, and it is very commendable and is very known for its assembly line. The next place that we went to was the Ramen Museum, and the Ramen Museum is mainly famous for its different types of ramen in its 6 different shops in the basement.
We then went to Kyoto, and we walked under the many torii gates, and the markings on each gate represents the family that donated that gate. We then went to a tea ceremony, which was very special, and we visited the Golden Pavilion, which was built by a shogun.
Next, we went to Hiroshima. That was definitely the most intense day of our trip. We went to the building in the top corner, which is called A-Bomb Dome. That is the building closest to the hypocenter to actually survive the atomic bomb blast. And as we walked around, our tour guide told us about the 90,000 people who died immediately from the immense heat of the bomb, and also the thousands of others who, because of the heat, were completely burnt. And we learned that many of these people actually jumped into the main river in Hiroshima to try and cool themselves off. Unfortunately, with the amount of people, many of them drowned, and for weeks afterward, there were dead bodies washing up every time the tide was high.
Going to Hiroshima as an American I felt very ashamed to have anything to do with this event, and I feel like it was very unnecessary for our country to have to do something like that, killing so many innocent people for such an unworthy cause. And Hiroshima now is supposed to promote peace and make sure there are no more Hiroshimas anywhere. In the bottom corner, there's a flame. It's not meant to be eternal, but until the production of atomic weapons are abolished, then that flame will continue to be lit.
Alright, so next up, Miyajima.
It was a really good experience. It's an island right near Hiroshima. We went there using a ferry boat. It was my first time on a boat. I had a lot of firsts. I'll get into that later. Yeah. There is a torii gate on the bottom right. As you can see, it is unique because it's on water, and that's why it's called floating. It's not floating, but it's in the water. And you go through it to purify yourself before going into the shrine. And the island is very embraced in nature. They have a lot of cherry blossoms, unlike Georgia. They really bloom in a specific week in a year, and that's the week we went to. And people take advantage of that week. They
Cool.
do picnics, take really nice pictures. It's really nice over there.
Well, the next things, what we learned while we were over there was the economy. And one of the first places that we went to was YKK. And YKK is known for making 50% of the world's zipper supply. And the next place that we went to was the aforementioned Nissan factory, which again is known for its assembly line. And while we were there, we were able to see different bodies of cars being built.
So there are two main religions in Japan, Shintoism and Buddhism. Shintoism is the indigenous religion of Japan, and Buddhism was brought from India to China to Japan. So Shintoism is more spiritual, and like anything can be a god, nature, animals. And Buddhism is more a way of life. They believe in reincarnation and seeking nirvana, but usually they practice syncretism, which is the merging of two religions. So most temples and shrines incorporate Buddhism and Shintoism religion instead of in America how we would like have just Christian, Muslim, or Islam, or in Judaism and other religions. Another thing we got to do in Japan, which is my favorite, was eating a lot of food. We got to try a lot of ramen, which is different from your, Walmart, instant ramen that you're used to. It has a lot of they put meats and vegetables in their ramen. It's very protein rich, very nutritious. The broth is a lot tastier, more flavorful. Yeah. We also got to taste some sushi, which is also a lot different than what I'm used to seeing when I think of sushi. Like California rolls and stuff like that. The sushi that we got to have was just raw fish, and it's an acquired taste. It was a very nice experience having the authentic sushi.
I will now teach you a little bit of the language that we picked up over there. So I'm going to say the English meaning, and then I'll have you guys repeat after me when I say the Japanese pronunciation. So good morning is Ohayo gozaimasu.
Ohayo gozaimasu.
Thank you is arigato.
Arigato.
And it's delicious is oishi desu.
Oishi desu.
And if you want to make your statement more polite, you just add gozaimasu on the end. So you could say arigato gozaimasu. That's a very polite thank you.
Cool. Okay, so as I said before, I experienced a lot for the first time. First of all, plane ride. It was my first time up in the air, obviously. And it was 14 hours going to Japan and 12 coming back because of the jet stream. And it was really nice because I got to look down, look at the water, look at the ocean. I saw two seas combine and one being, higher density, and they were two different colors, and I saw the border, and that was nice. I also rode the bullet train. It's the one on the bottom in the middle. It's basically a plane as a train. It goes up to 200 miles an hour, and it was really nice, it was really fast. Ferry, I rode that as well. I'm gonna be honest, all of the things on that list is my first time. So the ferry was my first time on water and on a boat. Ramen, much better than American. It wasn't my first time eating it, but it was my first time eating ramen in Japan, from Japan. And it was thicker, richer, much different than, as she said, Walmart ramen. Tea ceremony, tea is much better. Well, it's much different, I'll say that. And the way you drink it, the way you do the whole tea ceremony is much different than how Americans drink tea. Factories operate much differently. You have little robots going here and there. They have their little procedures. In temples or shrines, the way they embrace the religion is much different than how Americans do it.
Cool.
Arigato gozaimasu.
Awesome.
Arigato.
That was an exceptionally good presentation.
Yes, thank you.
Yes, it was. What a trip.
I'm sure people have some questions, or at least they might. I don't know. Anyone?
I'm just so impressed. I mean, that was such a thorough presentation, and you guys did such a great job of all contributing a lot of meaningful information that it's good for you guys to come and for us to hear what you have done, because it makes us want to support these types of trips in the future for you and your classmates. And so thank you guys for volunteering for doing it, because I know that was probably a little scary to even put yourself out there to go on this adventure and do so many different things. So thank you for having the courage to do it, and for volunteering, and for learning so much, and also just working together to present the information that you presented to us in the articulate and well-organized, informative way that you did. So thank you.
I can tell just from meeting you here that you were certainly great ambassadors for us, and so I'm proud to see that you've been out representing the City of Decatur schools across the sea. So, and thank you for sharing that with us tonight.
I heard a few stories about how you all were able to collaborate and pull off getting a passport, and so it made me very proud to be a Decatur community member, because from what I hear, everybody worked well together and didn't just look at the problem and say, well, too bad. You went all the way until, you got a no, and you didn't get a no, you got a yes, and you made it happen. And you made it happen for one of our very deserving students. So I just want to say how proud I am when I heard that story. Thank you very much, all the teachers and the community members that do what you do. Appreciate it.
I just want to, in addition to you all doing a great job, I want to again thank Ms. Fry and all the staff at Decatur High School who helped make this happen under such a short deadline with a crunch, and particularly Ms. Fry, because if you hadn't cultivated the relationships and maintained those, the opportunity never would have presented itself. So thank you.
I just second all of that. That looks like really a great trip, and really a great. And I'm not always as confident about these trips that they're as meaningful and educational, but it's just obvious that this was extremely well planned, and that you all got a lot out of it. And so thanks to all. It was good.
Great job. All right, Tally Street.
Tally Street Upper School, Tally Street Upper Elementary School updates.
Good evening. Excuse me. I was hoping I didn't have to follow that. But
Yeah, see, we set you up.
thanks again for having me tonight. I have a pretty quick update tonight, but one of the most exciting things is to share that we have a new mascot and logo at Tally Street. So after 2 or 3 surveys of all stakeholders, including parents, students, and our faculty and staff, the tiger unanimously was voted by all 3 stakeholder groups to be our mascot, and then our logo over on the right. So we're really happy about that.
So those are very cool. How did they get made?
Kristen Hutchinson, who created Westchester's logo, and also who just recently redid the eagle at Glenwood. I reached out to her. Rochelle spoke very highly of her, and so I reached out to her, and she and I got together, and I just told her what my ideas were, and then we took it back to the SLT, and they gave feedback. We struggled a little bit at first. We had some tigers that they felt like were too fierce, and some were too kitty, and so
These are very
we ended up coming up with a perfect one.
That is good. It's really good.
Especially with the blue eyes being the color of our school. So we're really excited about that. The way we roll this out to all the students, a lot of the kids who will be going to FAVE got to tour FAVE. And so since our kids who were going to go to Tally did not have that opportunity, I went around the school with my phone and took several video clips of what they would see if they would have come through and walked through the building. So I went to each of the feeder schools, showed the video clips, and then revealed the mascot to the kids. And so they were real excited about that. Our SLT and I are still working on our vision and mission. Vision statement we have down. Mission statement's really, really close, but we had a couple of opinions at the last minute, so I didn't want to present it until we had it set. But our vision at Tally is going to be to prepare students who lead with integrity, strive for academic success, and are innovative, globally minded risk takers. So after multiple meetings and input, that is our vision statement, and we'll be able to present our mission statement very soon. Now, the fun part. The main difference you'll see with some of these pictures is they're starting to put the metal siding on where it would not be brick, and it's looking really nice. So that area right there is the gymnasium, and you can see that it's come a little farther since this picture. There's a really nice shot of the design. That's on one side of the gymnasium, where really nice windows. Same gym view, but a little bit different. This is in building A, level 2. This will be one of our third grade wings, and so it's the hall that has the green color scheme and the blue, so it's looking really nice. This is just to show you the cabinets are starting to be installed into the classrooms, and each level on each of the different buildings have a different color scheme. So you can see on the left, the orange cabinets have already been installed, and the yellow ones are being installed as well. I just didn't take a picture of that one. And this was very exciting to see. I walked down to the gym and the cafeteria, and they're starting to lay tile. Very bright, very cheery. I think our kids are really, really going to like it. And teachers are going to love it to be able to say, stay on the blue line or stay on the green line. Just a few more pictures of the cafeteria. The lighting is just really, really cool. And then the last picture here is they're starting to install some of the equipment, which is another good sign that the building's coming along really nicely. And this will be really exciting to our students. They're starting to do some work on the bottom playground. Our playground will be 2 levels. So this is, last week they started pouring the concrete for the stairs. What will be really cool is we'll also have a slide out there where kids can also slide down and then walk back up the stairs. So that's going to be really, really fun for the kids. So that's just
walk up the stairs.
Right.
Keep telling
Exactly.
yourself that.
So that's just a quick update, unless you guys have any questions.
That's great.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
I can't speak highly enough of Billy and all the work that he's doing. Like, I feel so fortunate that we were able to get somebody in the position, and Billy especially has such awesome skills and has just really embraced this. And I've talked to several teachers that are going over there, and they so appreciate Billy's outreach and trying to bring staff together already, and there's not even a building there yet. So just kudos to you, Billy. You're doing a fantastic job, and it's much appreciated.
Okay, we're on to our action items. Pardon me while I fumble. The first action item is the board policy manual. These are revisions to the board policy manual resulting from legal review.
Correct.
You want to say anything further?
That's about it. You may recall that we decided we'd get kind of an interim review of the policy manual before we feel it's totally finalized, just to make sure there aren't any major things we need to do differently. So we sent it off to the attorney, and the red line changes you see are there. And then we also added a policy in there about kind of a vendor review process and what that would look like, which we will be developing administrative regulation for. So the details are in the red line. I think that's about it.
Do we have a motion to approve the revised manual?
So moved.
Second.
Discussion?
Yes. It's okay. There is a section in the manual. First of all, I had some questions, which some have been answered, about the degree to which this was legal requirements versus legal recommendations. And my opinion on that is that if there's any ambiguity, I'd like to know which are which, because I'm all in favor of us meeting all the legal requirements, but particularly in the limitations section 3.5.e, items 13 through 16, where it gets into conflict of interest. My question is, has the law been revised? Have the rules been revised? Because we basically cut and paste what the law and the rules required us to have there, and this is very expansive.
I have the same question, which I meant to answer for myself before I came in, but I don't have an answer.
So I'm obviously not an attorney. All I know is our attorney said that these needed to be there, and so that's why they're here. If we want to get either another opinion or get more information, then I would recommend we table the vote and get that information before we adopt it. But I don't know. All I know is the attorney said these need to get added in, so.
Okay, I'm particularly uncomfortable with disinviting an educator who might live in the city of Decatur from serving on the board. I realize that there's potential conflicts there. I mean, it's obvious that it's a recommendation, but it's something that I would think the board should have a conversation on before we adopt it, if it's not clear whether it's a legal requirement or a recommendation.
I am on that one. You're talking about number 14, about be employed in any position within City Schools of Decatur.
Or even the Department of Education. I know that we've had people
Yeah.
who've worked in the Georgia Department of Education who have worked with the schools and could potentially become candidates for board. And I'd be surprised if we could not allow an employee of the Department of Education who happens to be a resident.
There's some grammatical issues that make it seem that these are not pulled straight from the statute.
Okay.
Because I had made notes, like they're not, the constructions are not parallel, which one would assume they would be if they were pulled from another regulation. So I think it's worth just checking it out, and nothing really
think it's
turns right now on whether we approve this at this time or not.
That's exactly right.
The other, the other thing that jumped out at me, and this is more of my particular preference and may not represent the preference of the board, was that it starts to have lots of code citations and rules citations, which we've already, I believe, got in the appendix. And so the question is whether or not we're comfortable kind of scattering those throughout board policy. My personal preference is I'd rather the board policy be the board's policy. And when I start seeing those little code references, I know you're gonna say,
I'm not.
It could be helpful to have the code references there because that would indicate when we need to go look things up in the appendix. And so there is a possibility that could be helpful. On the other hand, to me, I would have pause as a board member from touching any section of the policy manual that has a code reference.
For what it's worth, I was going to say, I think you make a very good point. And it's a little bit ambiguous because in some cases, the code references are saying that your administrative regulations must ensure that they're consistent with certain things, which I think is a good add because it's important for us to know that that regulation exists and you need to comply with it. In other cases, the references are just there, and it's not clear whether, like, under policy 2.3, there's a reference to the U.S. Code, which I can't imagine the U.S. Code actually mandates stakeholder participation regulations.
It actually does. That's one of the title regulations.
So maybe I'm surprised, but I am surprised
Yep.
that exists as the format that we had used elsewhere, not consistently, but was to try to put a little note box to explain the references. So instead of putting them in there, to have a reference down below that says, go see this code section and here's what it does. So I think maybe we should put it in that format again.
Okay. Okay, so what I will do is reach back out to the attorney to ask which of the changes are recommendations versus which are legally required, and to explain why it's which.
Could you ask, although we need to discuss which attorney this is going to be?
That was my next question.
Because it needs to be a different one,
Okay.
in my opinion.
I was gonna ask who did this, but I think I understand now.
But I think that the attorney who does this, I would ask that they take a look at the style that we had tried to adopt in terms of.
Right, that was my next thing also, is to.
Try to mimic the form and do their best. And I'm
Yes,
sure
with like the note idea, instead of just putting a reference, like explain what that is connecting with.
Right, with the exception, like on policy 2.5, it says, I'm not gonna talk about it, I don't, there might be some exceptions.
Like
but-
there's some where the policy might say, create an admin regulation that fulfills the rules set forth in Code of Georgia, blah, blah, blah.
Correct.
Is different than saying, here's a statement, and then in parentheses, I'm just gonna put a reference and not explain why I put that reference there.
That's it,
Okay,
that's it.
we can do that. And we will reach out to a different attorney.
And I think,
I just had one very small comment or question, but on the bottom of page 23, item 10, it's referencing county. Is that
Yes.
intentional?
Yes, apparently the way, this was my understanding, because I asked about that one, is the way that the rule is written, it actually says county,
Okay.
and that we would have to use the same wording.
Okay,
So,
okay.
yeah. I think it's another example of the legislature forgetting that city school systems
Right.
exist.
That's what I
and
was
they just
thinking. I
wrote
was-
it as though everybody's a county system.
Okay.
Has that happened before?
I seem to remember something like that. Okay, so do we want to amend the motion to table?
Yeah, let's table.
Move to table?
Second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Chair votes aye, so that motion carries, and we are on to the budget.
Could I just make a point of order, is that we're tabling until the next regularly scheduled board meeting?
Yep.
That's our assumption when we table that. I know that parliamentarily, when you table something, you put it down and never to pick it up again.
Okay. We'll bring it to the next meeting.
Okay.
I have a few typographical, like commas, that I'm just gonna hand you.
That sounds good. All right, Susan?
Good evening, members of the board, Dr. Duty. Tonight, I have in front of you the tentative budget for all funds. Here, I'm showing you basically what our calendar is. We had the first budget presentation last month at the regularly scheduled board meeting. We had a second budget presentation at the board work session. Tonight, we have the tentative approval, and in June, the approval of the budget, the tentative approval of the millage rate, with the final approval of the millage rate in July. So, I have been working with David, and he's been giving me some good ideas. And one of the things that we actually did was we provided you here with a listing of the taxes that have been levied since 2011 and projections through 2024. In addition to the tax revenues, we've also provided you with the enrollment figures, and he showed me this handy dandy thing to where I can show you two different things at one time. So you've got the list of millions to your left, which is basically what we're levying, and then on the right in the enrollment. And then at the bottom, we've actually provided you with what those millage rates look like, the net increase in tax revenues, and the percentage of that increase, along with the amount per student over the course of those years from 2011 to 2024. And I can go a little bit more in depth if you want me to, or do you want me to just move on? Okay. All right. So we've added a new slide. So basically what I've done here, and we may have to go back, but I've provided you with a listing of all the homestead exemptions within the city of Decatur. So these include not only our exemptions, but the exemptions for the city as well. So then what I've done is actually provided you with the property tax exemptions for the city schools of Decatur, for the senior property tax exemptions, as well as the senior property tax exemptions for the city of Decatur. So you'll see that this is from the year 2014 till the current year. It doesn't go out after this year, but it shows you through this year, so that you can get an idea of what our tax exemptions look like before the 65 and older 100% exemption, and then what the city's exemptions have looked like as well. And if you want me, I can flip back and forth. Or
And just to clarify, that's per year and not, or it's cumulative. Okay.
It's
so-
cumulative at the top. I'm sorry. Yeah. The cumulative dollar amount just kind of shows you how much we've lost from the tax exemptions.
Oh, I see. Okay, but the graph is showing per year.
Per year.
Got it. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Go ahead.
Okay. They're still looking, so I didn't want to just. So here what I've done is I've provided you with the expenditure assumptions, and it lasts for 2 pages. So basically what I provided you with last month showed you tier 1 and tier 2. We've included tier 1 and tier 2 in it, and there was a couple additional things that weren't included in those that we've put in. So basically this shows you all of the different things that we are proposing to add to the fiscal year 2020 budget. and it continues on this page. So if you need me to go back and forth, just let me know.
And just to clarify, the vast majority of these items were on the last two, because it was the tier 1 and tier 2, but there were 3 items that we had received business cases for that we had put on a separate list along with some other ideas. And those other ideas we had discussed at the work session we're probably not going to get to this year. So we put those 3, it's the last 3 I think on here on this list, because to be fair to those who put in their request, these are things we would have wanted if we had been able to get to that list. So that's why you see 3 additional things on here that weren't on the previous 2 lists.
I do want to give a shout out to my colleagues because they did a really good job of making sure that everything got put in this year. Because we've had problems in the past where not everything gets in and then it's got to get added. So I want to give them a shout out for that. So here I've actually provided you with an updated general fund budget for fiscal year 2020 and projected out through 2024. The main difference between this one and the last one is we've gotten some preliminary tax digest information, so we were able to update based on that. And then also we went ahead and based on the information that we got from you guys at the last meeting, we added 0.5 out throughout. So we started with a 20.99 millage rate, and then we added 0.5 out every year, and we basically came up with that to where the 1 year we will not go beneath the 4% fund balance requirement. So there's really not a whole lot different other than that between this one and last time. But I did write down if you had any questions about that.
Do you know when we're anticipating the study being done with the city on tax revenue?
No, he said that basically that he was supposed to hear back from them and then we were going to have a conference call, but I need to follow up with him again because I did after you and I spoke, and then I haven't heard anything back other than I got some information from him today, but not about that. Okay. All right, so special revenue funds. Basically, these represent grant funding received from the state and federal sources. They're spent on a reimbursable basis. And basically what we do is we budget based on what we actually received in for the current year allotments, unless we know of something drastic that's happening. The capital funds, basically we are averaging about $5 million, a little over $5 million in collections. And the debt service payments on Beacon Hill, the 2010 Fifth Avenue Certificate of Participation and the 2014 Certificate of Participation, as well as budgeted expenditures based on projected completion of the referendum approved projects and the GO bond approved projects. And so basically you kind of have to start at the bottom with this, but it gives you an idea that we are projecting to end the year with $4.8 million or $4.9 million in fund balance. And then we're going to add an additional $5.1 million to that next year, and we're going to spend approximately $7.8 million, leaving our ending fund balance next year in capital funds of $2.3 million.
One of the questions that was asked earlier was about how the buses are paid for, and the answer at the time was general fund, but I see a line here under capital funds.
Okay, so what we did was, yes, the lease purchase will be used from general funds. We've basically budgeted $141,000 for the last, I don't know how many years since we got our own buses. And so that will continue to pay for that lease payment. What we did was in this SPLOST referendum, we made sure to include the purchase of a new bus every year so that what we can start doing is having our own fleet eventually and not have to lease our buses, that they'll just be our own. And so then that way we can add to that. So this is in addition to that lease so that we can start having our own buses and not
getting them on some sort of a cycle, right?
Correct.
So we're
That
not
is
having
correct.
to replace the whole fleet at once. So.
That is correct. That's a great question. School nutrition funds, basically, Allison provides me with this information. So if there's any questions that you guys have, please let me know and I'll get back with her on this. But she prepares this information. So basically, she's saying that she's going to get about $2.6 million worth of revenues in and then expend that as well. And also what we did was we budgeted for the salaries and benefits, not the salary, the benefits for 4 additional staff for the opening of Tally Street. So that is included in this as well.
That's included in the school nutrition budget or in
The
the other?
salaries are included in the school nutrition budget under that FTE number of 49.02. The benefits are included in the general fund because we're still offsetting that budget with that. And that's all I have.
A question that was around slide 15 was maybe it was plus or minus a slide. You mentioned the GO bond.
Yes.
And there was something about finishing, paying off. No? Can you
No,
maybe
last
go
year we paid off.
back one more?
One slide back. There you go.
There it is, budget expenditures based on projected completion of referendum-approved project. Okay, right.
It's about the projects. Yeah.
We did pay off a bond this year. We had a $5 million bond that we had with SPLOST 4 proceeds that we actually paid off in this fiscal year.
Well, my question is specific to the 2007 and the 2015 GO bonds. I shared in a question earlier. Sorry I didn't give you much time.
I have an
Mother's Day
answer.
weekend. Do you know what the
I looked
combined cost of the school burden for capital projects is in bonded indebtedness as translates to mills?
So basically what I did was I looked it up, I pulled up the city's website, and based on the school bond, it is 1.85 mils.
Wow.
And then just the bond, which is, this is before my time, so I'm going by what I think I know. So I'm going to throw that out there. This is where we went with the city and actually got a bond for the PAC.
Right, the 2007.
And it is 0.87. So
Okay,
it
that
totals
Combined,
2.72.
it gets 0.87.
Yeah,
2.72.
2.72.
2.72.
That's that's debt service on school bonds.
It's both the school bond, which is 1.85, and then the bond that we went into with the city for the PAC, 10 plus years ago or
And
something.
part of that, my memory on that is very slim, but I think there's a portion of the 2007 bond that includes city projects.
It does, and so I think that probably half of that would be ours and half of that would be theirs. I just pulled the full amount. So it's 1.85 is the school bond, and then the 0.87, half of that 0.87 would be ours.
I'm actually a little surprised because I thought it would have gone down with the digest going up, but it must be the way the financing was structured.
It might be.
So, all right, thank you.
You're welcome.
And you can find those numbers on your tax bill if you go to DecaturGATax.com and type in your name. I just pulled up your tax bill, Garrett, and there it is right there, 1.85.
How much am I paying?
Yes. You're paying $310.06 a year to the GEO bond.
Support the capital
Yes, exactly.
projects. All right.
But it is half of that. I'm glad you brought that up because I just jotted those down really quick. And so it's the 1.85 is just the school bond that we went out for a few years ago. And then the 0.87, half of that 0.87 is ours. Half of it's theirs.
Thank you.
Other questions?
I'm guessing there are some.
Yeah, I do have some. Earlier this year, there was an issue with the high school artificial turf field. It ended up being replaced under insurance-related coverage. But had it not been covered under insurance, it was coming close to being due. And so my question is, are we budgeting for those types of expenses and setting aside like funds so that for things that are anticipated to have a very large cost in a 10-year cycle, that we're setting those funds aside?
I would say no. That we're working towards that of creating life cycle funds and things, and Noel, feel free to jump up if I'm speaking incorrectly, but it's a goal to get to the point that we have that. But right now, we need all the money to do the projects, and we don't have the room to set it aside but to be doing the life cycle savings. So when it comes up, you already have the money. So is that accurate, Noel?
Yeah, that's
Okay.
right on. I think in our next phase of things, as we get beyond our capital spending, we'll get to that.
Okay, and the buses. All right, well, those are my questions, so I'll wait to hear other people's questions before going any further.
Okay, well, I mean, I have a lot of comments and observations. This is all really helpful information. I think that additional information about the senior tax exemption is it's very shocking to see those numbers. And really, when you translate those numbers into mills, it's significant, and it really shows us what that's costing us and what it ends up costing the rest of the tax base, because we have to increase the mills to offset the losses that are paying for that exemption, which, you know, it's just, you know, when I did a quick calculation, it's in the most recent year, it's about 3 mills. So I just think that's worth noting. Because 1 mill, I think we talked about this earlier, is about $1.7 million.
The cumulative.
No, the $5,125,000 that we did not collect in 2019 only is 3 mills.
That is not cumulative, that's this year.
Correct, that's this year, so.
$5.1 million of senior tax exemptions.
Right.
This year was
This
5 million?
year.
I
This
thought you
year.
were saying that was cumulative.
No, the
No,
cumulative
the
is
cumulative's on the very top.
14,481,077. That's the total.
So it's not, and Garrett pointed this out in an email earlier, it's not a $5.1 million increase from past practice. You would want to take out about 1.5 million, because as you can see in the start of that line, we had about 1.5 million of exemptions to begin with. We had estimated it would go to 1.2, and which would have taken it to 2.7, but it's actually at 5.1 right now.
I want to point out that
Go ahead.
I think the cumulative, I don't think the cumulative is, the 5.1 to me is a eye-popping number. The cumulative loss to me is, we're mixing apples and oranges. I mean, we're talking about operations, and so it's an annual operating cost. And to stack up those losses year over year.
I see what you're saying, but I actually disagree, because it gets to the point of actually Garrett's question of, are we setting aside money for like long-term expenses and things like that? So there is a cumulative aspect to it, and we did it to mirror what we've been talking about for the austerity cuts,
Which I've
right?
never liked.
And the austerity one, we also look at the cumulative impact of over time, how much money have you lost?
I've always
So-
found that to be inappropriate.
Well, that would explain why you find this one inappropriate.
Well, and just observing our budgets and what our practices have been recently, our fund balance has gone down. And that means that we've been, you know, you can say living beyond our means possibly if that's not sustainable. And so another thing that I observed is while we have been using our fund balance to do things that we consider essential, we have not increased our millage rate for several years. And I feel like that was, you know, perhaps, you know, looking at that, it looks as though if we want to maintain our fund balance going forward, as opposed to watching it continue to dwindle, which we can't, because we're required to to have the 4% as a minimum, then that's not sustainable. We can't keep the millage rate where it was, and perhaps it's past due that we increase it. Perhaps we should have increased it incrementally over the past 4 years to keep a healthier fund balance as opposed to letting it dwindle. We're still above where we are required to be, but we're starting to get close to where we're not comfortable with it anymore.
Our fund balance our actual fund balance tends to be over 15%. Our budgeted fund balance is under. So in practice, we've always been over, and we've had so much funds, we have to do something with those funds. It's not a matter of, and I would say that if you take the it's not 2.7, if you take the 2.25, that's in bonded indebtedness, and you add it to 18.66, we're right up there with our historic, going back 10 years, millage rate until we get to like 25 back at the beginning of that. I'd have to look at the numbers. But if you include the bonded indebtedness, our effective millage rate is it's like 20.9. And don't trust me on those. Somebody check them, because I make
So
mistakes.
I'm confused as to why you're including that. Like, what are you comparing that to? Because there have been bonds previous that have not been
Specifically,
included
when we were preparing for the $75 million GO bond, we
Mhm.
reduced the millage rate because we were trying to stay, and I know Lewis has his issues with this, we were trying to stay millage rate neutral.
Right.
And we were able to do that to a large extent. And, a lot of, the further things get back, like the 2007 bond is a little bit out of mind, but that's, 0.4 or something mils.
Mhm.
So if you add those back in,
Right.
because that's a burden of the school
I
system on the
understand that.
taxpayers,
I understand that.
then our millage rate has stayed relatively, it hasn't gone down.
Yeah,
It's stayed fairly stable.
Well, so I see that. So in order to, when we passed the GO bond, we reduced the millage rate by 1.84 to
The year
the
before.
18.66. I understand, in order to offset what we anticipated being an additional cost, which meant that we collected that much less money.
Well,
For-
that much money was still being collected, but some of it was going directly
It was
to
going
the
in the GO
capital
bond, but at the
project
same
financing.
time, we passed the senior exemption. And so we were also collecting less money there.
Mhm.
And so the significant difference really started in 2016. I'm just observing that for then 4 years, we haven't increased the millage rate at all. And it's been substantially below where it was historically. Understanding that we had to have the GO bond, but that was really a necessity. There's no way,
The expense of operations, capital necessity at the expense of our operation.
the way that we balanced it. And I see that we tried to offset it in that way, but you're correct, in the expense of operations. But what I'm saying is we didn't necessarily make those cuts at that time, or have to make cuts at that time in all of the budget areas, perhaps because we had a fund balance that we could continue to take from each year, but gradually it's been reduced to a point where now I don't think we can continue, and it's clear that we can't continue that. And I'm simply saying that had we not made such a drastic cut at that time of going down 1.84 mils in that operational budget, we would have had a larger fund balance now to draw from, and wouldn't necessarily have had to propose such a large millage rate increase to offset the fact that we haven't changed it at all for 4 years, despite opening Westchester. So, I see where we are now, and I was just making observations as to how I think we got here. And I think it's a combination of having reduced the millage rate by 1.84 and also passing the senior exemption, which is now.
I'm confused because our fund balance, correct me, Susan, if I'm wrong, but our actual fund balance has been above 15% going back at least 5 years. Which is actually means since our expenditures are going up, our fund balance is probably actually going up as well.
So it has gone up. The only thing about that, though, is that it does go up every year, but then when we actually budget, we end up having to use that to offset the budget so that it will be balanced.
But then our revenue tends to come in, several percent higher, and our expenditures tend to come in several percent
Right.
lower. And so from my perspective, it's looking forward, the numbers are always scary because we're very conservative in our budgeting. And if we want to balance the budget and have a fund balance, then that the conservatism built into the budgeting process requires us to raise a millage rate. But in practice, we haven't had to for a while.
But we've changed that this year. From what I understand, we are budgeting in a much less conservative way at our request. So that's why I am now more concerned about not raising the millage rate adequately to cover our expenses, because I don't expect that there will be as much cushion in the numbers going forward at our request. And so, to your point, so that we could have a more accurate budgeting process and be more targeted about not having excess that we are therefore not translating into a millage correction.
And just to clarify, one of the things that came out of the work session near the end, the reason that this is a stepped millage rate increase is to kind of address both of those issues of there is, the farther out in the future you go, the more uncertainty you have and the more compounding of, if we are too conservative, it compounds, right, over the course of those years. And so the idea being that while we're projecting for increases, if the concerns Garrett's raising are come true, even with our less conservative budgeting, we would not then have to do those increases, for instance, right?
Correct.
So just to clarify, this is kind of a trying to address both of those at the same time is where that concept came from.
Right. That's all my comments for now. I have some for later.
This isn't really directly related to the budget, but I do think that, I think Heather, you brought this up at the work session, but I think it's imperative that we have some conversations with the city commissioners about the mill on their side of the table and also the senior tax exemptions, because what we're learning is that our senior tax exemption cost us significantly more than what we had projected, and that by not raising the mill over the course of the past several years, we're getting ourselves into a position where we need to raise the mill by a fair amount in order to balance the budget into the future. But given that I'm just curious, I'd like to see sort of like some history on the city's mill, because we have to think about how our actions are going to affect all of the taxpayers, including the senior tax exemption. And currently there's a sunset scheduled for that. And so what are we going to do about that? I don't think we can continue to do what we've been doing at the rate that we've been doing it. So we need to make some sort of adjustment, and I know we'll have more conversations about that down the road, but that's going to impact our residents here directly, as will the mill increase. And so there's another side to this equation that we need to have some conversations with them about. How can we, both the schools and the city, do what we need to do in order to have a balanced, sustainable budget while simultaneously, jointly supporting our community members? And that's not something we can do by ourselves.
I made a note of that in our to-do list so we wouldn't forget. And we can look up the city's historical millage rates as well, and we can gather all that together of our millage rates, their millage rates, bond millage rates, et cetera, just so we can have kind of a picture of what has happened over time.
Yeah, I think it would be good to see sort of a side-by-side picture of that. I mean, what's shocking to me too is just this. Not just how much more the senior tax exemption has cost us in terms of tax revenue, but the differential between what the schools are doing for the seniors and what the city is doing, it's substantial. And I think it's something that is of equal importance to both the city and the schools, because we had conversations with the city about this when we were trying to get the senior tax exemption passed. I think that they were very supportive of it as well. So although it's of equal importance, it's not of equal funding. And so we need to have some conversations about that.
It does also present an opportunity. We don't have to wait until the senior homestead exemption expires to try to revise or change the senior homestead exemption. So if we get the report back from GSU with some good ideas on how we could either use income qualifications or cap it at a certain median value of a Decatur home, whatever the ideas are, we could potentially reclaim,
But we would have to go to the General Assembly to do that.
that is true. But if we don't go to the General Assembly and it expires, if they're not willing to work with us on that, it would not renew. And if it doesn't renew, then we would go back to, and we reclaim, $3.5 million a year as it grows. And if we do reclaim the part so that we balance it with what the original anticipated impact was, we would still regain perhaps, 1.5 to 1.75 mils in the equivalent of income. So that's just, a couple years around the corner.
Or more. I mean, actually more.
Could be more, especially as those numbers grow.
Right.
One thing I note is, so the exemption is obviously,
A priority.
we can't afford it, right?
Right.
In its current form. When we passed that exemption, I think we were anticipating that the additional losses would be about 1.5 million,
1.2 million.
1.2 million.
Our original estimate was 750,000. We reviewed that at one point and it
And upped
changed
it.
it to 1.2 million.
When we actually went forward with it, I mean, we knew
By the time,
1.2.
correct,
By the time we said, yes, we're gonna do this.
correct.
I thought it was 1.2.
I thought it was 1.2. It turns out to be, and that was the increase, so and the real number is something like,
So that would be about 2.7 if you took if that 1.2 number would have been 2.7 total. So 3.8 was about 1.1 million beyond what we expected, and 5.1 is about 2.4 million beyond what we expected.
so that's, there were two components or two purposes. One was to keep seniors in our home, their home, and therefore to potentially slow the growth in enrollment. And in the absence of good data, it seemed at least conceivable that these things would be somewhat offsetting. We actually don't know the extent to which it's had that effect, and that's what the
That's
purpose
why
of
we
this
have
study
a-
is going to be.
That's right. That's why we're having the tax study.
And hopefully we can come up with a more targeted and appropriately limited exemption that actually has the desired effect at far less cost.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's all money coming in. I have one thing to propose that we include. So this would be an additional expense, and I know that there are a lot of competing interests for money. But one thing that, after looking at the items that were on the additional supplemental sheet from our work session, one thing did jump out at me as being something that we've been talking about for a long time, since the inception of the extracurricular orchestra program 7 years ago. That has grown now to 90 students, which is really fantastic. But largely, we have to thank completely DEF and volunteers for making that happen, which is pretty fantastic. The challenge with the program right now is that it ends in 8th grade. And so the proposed item here is to add 2 orchestra directors to fulfill the expectation of having an extracurricular or an orchestra program within the curriculum in Renfro and through the high school. But in having several conversations with many people who have been involved with the program, it seems that perhaps at this time just one instructor could fulfill the expectation, because right now the way that the schedules are split, and it being just one orchestra at Renfro and one orchestra to be grown at the high school, it sounds like from those people that I've spoken with that would be reasonable for one person to do. So actually that request is really just cut in half. So adding one orchestra director, and many people may ask, why that? Why not all of these other great things? And to that I say, it's been a long time coming, and I think that it's time that we embrace this program, strike while the iron is hot, while we have all these fantastic, talented students, before somehow, if anything were to happen with our volunteers or this rising group of students from the upper elementary, we would miss the opportunity to harness what's already a strong program. We're not proposing to hire a director to start something and try it out. We have something that is actually really fantastic, and just last week I was there, and I know Dr. Duty was there, and we heard from many parents who were at this concert where we watched the Renfro Orchestra and the two fave groups, the 4th and 5th grade play, and it was really a wonderful thing to see. But the sad thing that I felt was that the entire group of talented students on the stage for the Renfro Orchestra the talent would be disbanded, and I felt that that was a shame. And I think this is an investment for something we've been actually working on for a long time, that it's time to embrace.
So what is the budget number that you're proposing?
Well, it would be
It'd be
half
about
of,
85,000,
half of
roughly.
that. So one position, and then I think we would need an additional line item similar to the band line item for instruments. So
Correct,
for
and that's
about-
why that is a little bit higher. It's about 170, just for 2 teachers. It's about 85,000 for one, and
Okay.
then we would have a little bit more because we would want to provide some instruments for kids who couldn't rent them or
Right.
otherwise afford them, or some of those odd instruments that, like we purchase for the band, like
Mm-hmm.
sousaphones, for instance, because who wants to buy a sousaphone, right? But yeah, we could definitely, if the board desires, incorporate a single orchestra director for exactly the reasons that Heather shared of ramping the program up and sharing it between RMS and DHS. If that's your desire, we can certainly do that.
That's how we started, I think, the chorus program at the high school. I don't think we were involved in that. That's just how it grew. It started as a partial FTE and then grew as the program grew.
So what would we need to do in order to, would there be 2 different ways we would look at this? Do we need to raise the millage in order to cover some of the things that we want? Or would we go through here and look at what we can take out or what potentially could be taken out, or?
So I'd say one or the other, or a combination of the
Or a
two.
combination of the two?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
And Heather, did we get a chance to really talk about what that could potentially look like, or we're just gonna wait to see how?
Well, I'd like to, I was gonna ask David for his help in that,
right.
because I don't know if there's any, what we were talking about, like low-hanging fruit or anything that could be scaled back slightly that wouldn't be a big impact. So I don't have any suggestions right now, but maybe that's
What we
something we
could
could
do-
discuss at our next work session or
That's
retreat.
exactly what I was gonna say. What we
Yeah.
could do is, if the board's desire is to kind of have a feel for that, so it makes it a little easier to figure out where could you cut and not, because the only spots you can cut aren't in this list, right? There are other spots where you could have better efficiency in our budget that are just things we've just done, right? Year after year after year. You may recall at one point Garrett was talking about zero-based budgeting for that exact reason, right? Because there are things that just continue in the budget, because once they're in, they're in. So we have done lots of brainstorming around those kind of things as well, and we could provide a list at our next, whenever we get together at a retreat or work session. And it would be in addition to these things, because these things are easy to look at because they're requests for new money, right? But there are other things that we have developed in a list as just potential ways to try to be more efficient with our budget that we could also look at in that regard. So we could definitely bring that as soon as Friday for the retreat
Okay.
if we wanted to have that.
Perfect.
I would just add, I'm certainly comfortable considering it and looking at options for how we can fund it, but I would like to also look at some of the other things that, just so we have sort of the complete picture of other needs in the district too, before we settle in on orchestra. And it's not that I don't support it, because I do, and I think, Heather, all of your points were very well made in terms of the timing, and this has been a long time coming and kind of harnessing some talent that's already there. But I want to have, I want to look at the whole picture of what the needs of the district are, and not just this one thing where there's certainly an opportunity and the timing is right. I just think that there may be some other things also where there's an opportunity and the timing is right too. And so if we're going to sort of go through the budget and look at kind of some changes that we could make to come up with some funds, I think that we should also sort of look at what other types of things we can spend it on. And I'm not saying that it wouldn't be orchestra, but we should at least have a conversation about what those other things are, whether it's equity initiatives or, hiring in, Orton Gillingham certified fellow to help our kids with dyslexia, or other things that we've been working on for a long time, and we've not quite made the progress that we want to make in those areas yet. I don't know. Those are the things that kind of come to the top of my mind, and I think that we all as board members have those things that we're individually passionate about, and those things tend to come to our mind first and foremost. And so I just want to explore, I guess, just more broadly, like what are the things that we could consider, and maybe it is orchestra that we land on, but I just want to have a broader conversation
I
about it.
wholeheartedly agree and encourage that. I felt like our work session was cut a little bit short because we had other things we were talking about also at the last work session, and so I would welcome that conversation.
I think that sounds great. One of the things just to emphasize is the list that's in front of you is the list that was generated by all the budget holders in the district. So if there are things like the orchestra, for instance, that you feel would be important to consider including, like an OG specialist or something like that, then let us know and we can get some estimated costs around those things. Because if it's not in this list, then that means nobody wrote a business case to say this is a need. And so there could be many different reasons for that, but just I don't want you to think there's like some other list out there of things. There may be other things that you know as a board member are important to you or important to a significant group of people or something like that. So if you can let us know those things, we can try to get some estimated costs around them so that when we have that overall discussion of here's all the things we brought, these other things like orchestra, OG, whatever, and things that we might be able to decrease to be more efficient, we can put that all together that way. So
if, first, I want to just say that I support the proposal to add the orchestra for the reasons that you described. And one way to look at it is that we've got a feeder program developed entirely through volunteer contributions and effort that's been hugely successful. We now have over 100 kids participating in this volunteer effort who are going to top out, so they've got nowhere to go. And so that continuity and that keeping the program, which has proven itself, which is I think the way these things should happen, which is that you start with the volunteer effort. Once you get that critical mass, this is a program that we need to support. From an equity consideration, one success that they've had at the, I think it's at FAVE, at the orchestra program, Nia tells me that they've identified at least one child who's a scholarship kid, so he's wouldn't be able to participate except through the generous contributions from DEF, which is helping to support the scholarship children. She said, this guy's a musician, and he didn't know it. And so this is, likely going to be life-changing for this kid. This is an opportunity and a path that likely wouldn't have been open, but now probably is. And so when we talk about developing and speaking to all the kids, whatever their particular talents or aptitudes might be, that's kind of what we're talking about. So for that reason, I think that I'd like to see it happen. I wanted to make another point, though, which is the point about a business case not being made for it. And this highlights a concern that I have, that we don't have anybody to make a business case for orchestra or these other programs. And there's this balance between, stick to policy and let you operate the system. Some of that depends on our confidence that all the interests are fairly being balanced, or not fairly, but that they're being considered, spoken for, and that this is kind of debate is occurring, and that you're going to surface, the best case. But that depends on our having an advocate for the various programs. I would like to see an arts director who is in charge system-wide of the arts, performing arts, music, visual arts, system-wide, whose responsibility it would be to think about these things, to make sure that the lower grades are appropriately feeding into the upper grades, that the curriculums are at least somewhat consistent. I'd like there to be a person, as I've talked about, whose mission it is, in addition to teaching class. I'm not talking about a new hire necessarily, but who has a charge to think about these things and what the district needs and what kind of business case ought to be presented to get some attention in the budget. That doesn't mean that they get what they ask for, but it does mean that there's someone whose responsibility it is to think about these things, and also would be the point person to go out and get those contributing funds and grant money from the Woodruff Arts Foundation and these other programs, because that's what we need in order to make those things happen, I think.
Okay.
To be clear, I'm not talking about my idea would be identify a person who is currently on staff, give them a substantial additional stipend, and then make them the arts coordinator. It seems like an item that could be done at a reasonable additional cost in the budget.
Okay.
That's my preference. I don't know.
So would this be in addition to this additional staff to support the athletics and activities person? Because isn't that a little bit what you're talking about, but not with the athletics?
Well, that's
We made it more
This is the whole point, is that right now, there is no arts person. We have an athletics person.
And
who's
you're talking
nominally
about
responsible for-
curricular things as well as the extracurricular arts, right? That's the difference.
Absolutely, right.
Whereas this
This one
position
is
is more about the extracurricular things.
Oh, okay, so they're two separate, completely
Correct.
separate, okay.
So just in terms of throwing it out, I believe that we should do this, but I would be interested in seeing if it's possible and talking about it at the work
No,
session.
we can pull together some numbers for that too.
You know, I don't have a particular horse in this race, but I did serve on the high school visioning committee back in 2009. And one of the outcomes of that committee was a strong community voice that said that we needed to have stronger supports for the arts, which I know we've talked about Decatur and the arts and being maybe a little extreme compared to other school districts. But I think this is an example of the business case point that I don't think we still have that champion for the arts that is, you know, in line with what Decatur wants and expects. I probably won't show up if we have an orchestra. I probably won't be showing up at the performances. But I do think this is one of those things where there's a critical mass and the timing's right and the sustained interest has proven itself. My concern with regard to Ms. Keola's comments is I could see the sustained interest. It depends on people who are volunteers who aren't funded. And all it takes is one person having to take another job or having a health problem and a house of cards can fall down. Not because there isn't a sustained interest, but because it can't continue to grow without additional supports. So I have danced around trying to stay in the policy governance framework without explicitly stating, you know, a position for this or a position for that. I do like the idea of an additional hat with a stipend. But I would want to, you know, and I've raised my concerns about the arts being the athletics first language. That because of our history, we have an athletics director who wears many, many, many other hats. And our language around that, intentionally or not, is athletics and other. Which just, you know, if it was the arts and other program and we put athletics under that, we would have the athletics, the booster club screaming. And I think that the arts, the athletics and the arts people have been quietly, you know, advocating for more for a very long time. I think it's, you know, we have to figure out how to make it work. You had some suggestions in one of our exchanges earlier where I had said, you know, that additional revenue that we get, the less expenditures that we actually spend.
You want to explain that?
Yes, if you could, that would.
Yeah, so one of the things I shared with Garrett as we were talking about budget is one approach we could take is, as you know, he has shared a couple times about that we typically get more revenue than what we're projecting, and we typically have less expenses than we're projecting. And so we have not taken those factors into consideration in this budget. Can you go to the one with that shows the actual general fund budget table? And so we put this together with the idea of never going below 4%. And so that's how we set the mill rate between never going to below 4% and having that step so that we could always tweak it in the future and maybe not do the increase. The thing Garrett and I were talking about is if the board wanted us to do a version of this where we take into account that we do typically bring in more revenue than we budget, we do typically spend less than we budget, so getting even a little bit less conservative and to accommodate for that, instead of shooting for a 4% minimum fund balance, shoot for the middle between the 4 and the 15, so whatever the 8.5%. Shoot for an 8.5% budget using that same philosophy.
Or
And
even a 10.
yeah, or a 10 or something like that. And the idea being that you're trying to be much more accurate on the actual budget numbers, and where you're putting your cushion in is in the unspent balance, and you're not budgeting to go all the way down to 4. So your cushion is that you're shooting for the middle of that 4 to 15, not the bottom of the 4 to 15.
The thing that appeals to me about that is that as you look out in your projections, the projections you carry out don't compound the padding, and so I would have a lot more confidence that those are going to be a lot more accurate because they're based on the accurate numbers.
I think that makes a lot of sense.
We can certainly present that when we do this other list too.
I think it would be interesting to see how that impacts it, and then talk more about how comfortable we are with whichever level of conservatism. And then I also am really looking forward to seeing the numbers come in from the city's study, because I think that will give us a much more accurate picture of the coming year. And if the numbers are looking, let's hope that they are even better than what we have here, then we can lower the target required millage, which would be nice. And we hopefully will know that. That'd be nice to know before June.
So are we supposed to, do we have to vote on this right now, or are we talking?
So typically we do vote on the tentative budget, and it is tentative, right? And then we have these kind of conversations, and when we come back at the next meeting in June, we have incorporated whatever we've discussed here or at like the retreat or a work session, and then hopefully have a final budget that has met all those needs at that point. But is it law that we have to vote on a tentative budget, or is it practice?
So basically, it is required from the DOE.
Vote on it. And I had a quick question. Where do we stand on the conversation when we were having about attracting new teachers and potentially looking at maybe not doing the retirement? Because that doesn't seem to be what's attracting, the younger.
The Social Security.
Yeah, Social Security, thank you. So where are we with that? Did we ever decide to just go ahead and maybe make that a non-option to be able to pay a higher salary? Or are we gonna table that for next?
We're tabling it for the fall engagement process. So some of you have heard me talk about this and some maybe not, but we're looking at redoing how we do our engagement and having it be more of a cyclical thing, not an issue-specific thing. So like have a first quarter engagement process. And in the first quarter, here are the things we're gonna talk about A, B, C, and D that may not even be related to each other. But that way people don't have to keep track of 10 different initiatives. They just know, hey, we're doing engagement this quarter and these are the topics. And then we're doing engagement the next quarter and these are the topics.
Completely confused.
So we had talked about doing the things of like for attracting and retaining staff and trying to figure out what we can do to make City Schools of Decatur more competitive in neighboring districts. And so what we decided is that there's not time this year to do that kind of engagement that we need to do. So we're putting that into the cycle in the new engagement process we're planning to kick off next fall, which will be a much more robust engagement process where you may be talking about budget and facilities planning and strategic priorities all in one engagement session, right? Instead of having 3 separate engagement sessions, have one, right?
You're talking about like town halls or
Correct.
some other
Much
kind of
think like the
open
boundary
houses.
planning process that we went through, and like you have the video presentations, you have the town hall meetings, you might have panel discussions like we saw with PBIS, and we're doing that for all these topics at once. And that way we can do a much more robust process. Because right now, when you have so many little topics, it's hard for anyone to pay attention to what's happening and to provide meaningful engagement. So the idea would be you kind of combine them together in a cycle. So that's where that would be incorporated, is some of those ideas we've talked about.
Okay, thank you.
I think
So
that
hopefully for the next budget is when,
Is when
is
we'll
the
be-
short answer is hopefully for the next budget.
That makes a lot of sense to me. But I'm also a little bit nervous about not having some substantial, something related to, I don't know what the final millage increase is going to be, but it's going to be, there's going to be one, I think. And it sure seems like we need to be getting some input on that as well. Maybe not as much. Certainly not the whole list of I'm just talking about surrounding this. And what is our sense about what we want to do in terms of?
I think that would be a great topic at the retreat, is to figure out exactly what we want that to look like. Yep.
All right.
Can I go ahead and broadcast two things? One that we haven't said tonight. We've said it before in work sessions, but there may be people here tonight who haven't watched or listened to those work sessions, is that typically when the City Schools of Decatur has opened up a school, the operational impact of opening up a school and that overhead has meant that we've raised the millage rate in the past by 1. We did not do that when Westchester opened. It is very justifiable, in my opinion, that we raise the millage rate by at least a mill. I worry very much about the impact of raising it further. There may be a difference of opinion, so that's something I hope we can talk about on Friday, and the impact that would have on affordable housing, rental rates. And I also want to point out that we all care very deeply about education. We know that there's a lot of needs, and we want to meet those needs. But we always used to say that 70% of people in Decatur, I'm sure it's not that high anymore, do not have kids in the school system. It's definitely well over half of the people in Decatur do not have kids in the school system. And I'm a little concerned that we may be getting ahead of the political will. We often see this because people will go to the city to talk about one thing, and they'll come to the schools to talk about another. But as soon as we mention that we're going to raise the millage rate, as soon as that word gets out, we may have a lot more people showing up at these meetings. And I think 1 would fit well within what people would anticipate and be willing to accept, and I am not certain how much further we can go without there being considerable pushback from the community.
Well, I think that goes to Annie's point of we needing to sit down with our
Partners.
cohorts, and talk about how we can work with the city on this and see if there can be some conversation.
And I would be curious too, Garrett, I think you're probably right that it's not 70% of the people in Decatur that don't have kids in the school district. But keep in mind the percentage of people in Decatur who are not paying taxes to City Schools of Decatur right now because of the tax exemption.
Mm-hmm. So
the people who would be affected by us raising the mill under the current setup where the seniors aren't paying towards the schools, maybe significantly less than 70%, but that's
true.
That's
they
sort
might
of
start paying attention once whatever happens with the senior homestead exemption.
I think that's
happens.
true. I think part of the conversation that we need to have and the education that we need to give to the city is not to just look at this as kind of a 1-year thing, right? We've got work to do over the next several years, and it's a shifting landscape, particularly as it relates to the senior tax exemption. So it may balance out in the long run.
I do think the discussion underlines the need for some outreach of some kind.
Agree.
What are we going to do for now? Do we have a motion?
Yes. I think we do, don't we? Oh, no, we don't.
So moved. To accept the tentative budget.
Second.
Further discussion?
Just with the current millage rate, I can't go there. But I look forward to the conversation and how things change in the next month.
I look forward to
Sorry,
the conversation.
Just to clarify, are you voting no or abstaining?
I'm waiting for the vote, but I'm telegraphing that I'll vote no.
So you're wanting a roll call vote, maybe?
All in favor?
I don't need a roll call.
Aye.
Aye.
No.
And I vote aye with the understanding that this is a tentative budget that's going to be revised following our discussions.
Correct.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you, Susan.
Thanks, Susan.
Okay. We are on to board committee. No, we're not.
Nope. Board member per diem and expenses. So the City of Decatur Charter has the clause that Members of the Board of Education shall receive compensation and reimbursement for expenses necessarily incurred in connection with their services as provided by resolution adopted by the Board of Education and not inconsistent with the Constitution and laws of the state of Georgia. So we've talked about the reimbursement of expenses pieces. That's actually covered in our board policy manual, so that's not an issue, but we have not talked about the compensation. So right now, the compensation is the same as it's always been, which is $50 per meeting, and that was based on what the old City of Decatur charter language said, but we have not discussed if we want to make any changes to that. So the idea here is to at least start that discussion so that if we want to make what we should do is make a policy change within, I think it's Section 3 of our manual, to state what we want the compensation to be if it's going to be something different than the $50.
So we've kind of talked about a few different things. Are we all on the same page as far as a board that we want to change that number?
First step, wouldn't it be to just agree that we want it to be changed in the charter? Just so that
Has
we
been
have.
changed
It has
in the
been
charter.
changed.
Okay, so it's,
That language I just read is actually in the
oh, so
city
it's
charter.
already been approved?
Correct.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay, yes.
And so I think that we were more so dancing around for a while, all being on the same page about wanting to at least have control over that.
And the
And
last
now we
time we,
do.
sorry.
Oh, go ahead. Mhm.
The last time we discussed this, you may recall, one of the changes we made was give the board members the opportunity to participate in insurance at their
Insurance.
cost, where eligible, or where our contract with that insurer allows it. So that was the only change that we had made the last time this came up, in case you don't recall.
And that change was made.
That change was made, that is correct.
And I know we talked about that as well, and just wanting to at least have some equity across the board with all five of us. And so if we did health insurance, not everybody would potentially benefit from health insurance because we might have 3 board members that have a better insurance plan with somebody else. Therefore, not making it across the board for the board. So I know that was more of a conversation we were having if that was going to be in lieu of being able to change the stipend, but I think now that we can have that conversation of actually changing it, then my vote would be that we don't necessarily need to talk about the insurance piece.
Gotcha.
Everybody kind of agree with that? Okay.
My perspective on these is that I don't expect that all board members would, I'll go ahead and say, take the insurance, but some might.
Right.
As long as it's at their cost, I have no issue with that at all. If we're going to change from their cost to the system paying for it, then we need to have the conversation on that. As far as the stipend and the per diem and what we get paid for these meetings that currently is $50, not all of us will take that. I'm perfectly fine with that. What I do think is important is that there are costs incurred with serving on the board and time, and there are people with kids, and not everybody can make everything work, and it's only fair if we want to allow every perspective and voice to sit at this table that we compensate board members fairly for the time that they're here so that that is possible. So I understand there's another end of that spectrum, which is board members are compensated very well for their time on the board, and then that might get into a conflict of interest in a sense with why are you serving on the board, for the paycheck or for the public service. My personal perspective is it's for the public service, and I would hope that we could compensate people fairly so that we could make serving on the board possible for anybody that lives in Decatur.
I'm not concerned about running up against us overcompensating ourselves. I don't think anyone the numbers that we've talked about, I don't think are anywhere close to sort of overcompensating where the money would be a motivator for anybody to do this job.
And I think too, just also looking at not just board members with children, but also when we do a retreat or when we go away, like when we went to Minnesota, and it was very encouraged for all of us to go, and what that means for all of us that have other positions, and using paid time off that we could be using for vacation with our families, or you know, or even setting up what needs to be done with our families when we're gone. So, and I just think that the value that we put on our teachers and our staff and how we show them that we value them by looking at what we give them every single year, because we want them to continue to be valued, and it's a continuous conversation. And I don't, you know, I think that there can be moments and times when the board can also look and value the time that we put in, and at least talk about it this time of year every year, now that we can make the decision and not have to go any further on what that looks like.
Great. Does
So what-
anyone know the last time it was changed? When was that?
When it was set in.
It was
by
set,
statute,
it was
right?
hard-coded into the city charter. So as long as that has been there, which is as long as anyone could
don't
remember
know
that
if
I
you can-
recalled
Okay.
before.
But it's also hard-coded in the statute,
Yeah.
the Georgia statute. And
is.
so, actually, I don't remember, I just don't remember right now why we have latitude if it's hard-coded in the statute.
guess
It's hard-coded in the
as a
statute
charter,
unless
but-
there's local legislation. So the city charter provides the local legislation, which allows the city commissioners to set theirs, and our language now matches their language for
And I
giving us the
believe,
ability
I
to set
think the
hours.
statute is like a stopgap in case there isn't local legislation, so
Okay.
that there's something for people.
What numbers are we talking about? So we're currently,
50
It's
is what we're
$50 a
currently-
meeting
No,
is
we're
the standard
currently-
right now.
it's 50, but there's a discussion about increasing it. What are we discussing?
I haven't heard it. I mean, at some point, we had data, I think. I don't know if you
Yes, Heather,
remember
you
that,
sent
but
that to me, didn't you?
well,
had
and
data on
we
what
could,
other boards
we
were-
got that more than a year ago from GSBA. I could resend that out to everybody and we could have a conversation about it.
Right.
You know, even
I
at,
know we can kind of compare just what other, I mean, it's very
varies
across the.
considerably.
Yeah, I mean, I don't even know if it's really gonna help us much. You know, there's also the conversation that we can be somewhat matched to what the, commissioners earn, although I believe they just had, what was that, last year, like 150, they hadn't had an increase in, I don't know, was it 20 years? Or something like that?
a long time.
So they're all the way at like $1,000 a month, which I think would be much too much of a jump for us to get to, so.
I think the statute allows the commissioners to do almost what's a salary.
Right.
But I think the statute forces us to think in terms of per diems and expenses, so it's slightly different, but the
I think
flexibility
we're
is there.
way more
Flexibility is
valuable
there,
than
yeah.
the commissioners, don't you? What the heck? The one thing I wanted to say is, so I'm open to the discussion. I have heard from some that the compensation levels that some other boards have created bad incentives. I don't know if that's what we're discussing, but if you look at that chart about what other systems in Georgia are doing, I'm told that quite a number of people run for those positions for the compensation, and that has created problems. I also, as I've said, and I think maybe this is not even on the table, but I think we'd run headlong into problems if we had system-paid health insurance, because all of a sudden you have someone whose health insurance is tied
Right.
to continuing to serve.
I don't
just
even think
that's a
we're
bad-
discussing that anymore. I don't think that's on the table. I think it was more just,
So this is a discussion for future action. How are we going to push it forward?
It's a discussion item.
I had a quick question too. How do we need to balance this with the budget? That was why I
So
thought
that's
this
one of the
was
reasons
kind
that came up at this time, is because we wanted to be able to incorporate it into the budget. Because if we make a change, if we make it any time between now and the December meeting, it would go into effect in January. So they would affect the last 6 months of this budget. So that's why we added it to this.
And where is it
agenda.
currently? Is it just in the operational?
There's a board budget. There's a board budget item for
Can I
the
ask-
stipends
I
that
don't mean to
we
put-
estimate how many meetings there are gonna be.
Oh,
We
okay,
budget for
I
it.
see,
Can
okay.
I ask, I don't want to put you on the spot, Susan, so if you don't know it offhand, we can get it later, but do you know the total, is it like $1,500 a month per board member on average per year, more or less?
Something like that. For everybody.
For everybody?
So, and that's probably, yeah, I don't remember ever making my fifth of that, but,
You probably forgot to cash the check.
what's a meeting? Is
That
a
does
meeting only
happen.
a board meeting?
No, work sessions.
And work
count.
sessions.
So,
So
but
average
it's important to
$100
say
a
that
month?
it's less than $10,000 that we're talking about in
For everybody.
current compensation for the entire board.
Correct.
which is, I guess, less than a single commissioner.
I think if I remember correctly, at least what they were proposing was 15,000 a year for the mayor and 12,000 a year for the commissioner. I don't know if that's what.
I think that's
passed
right.
or
And I
not.
think that's what passed, yeah.
Okay, so again, what's the next step?
So I guess,
Well, I think we need to give some direction to David and his team in terms of numbers, and I think that we as a board need to advance this and not kind of punt it to David, right? I think
I'd recommend that we at a minimum.
a little uncomfortable, and I think we should do
Double
it
the-
quickly because we've been talking about this for a long time, and we need to make a decision on it. So, I mean, I would propose at least doubling. I would even suggest considering tripling what we're making to $150 a meeting.
Could I
So
suggest
I
that
would
we
say
do those two things? We suggest a double, what would it look like if it doubles? And then have Heather and Tasha put their heads together with the research that you've got
Okay.
and make a proposal for another option.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, well, I'll share that with the entire board, and then we've all received it already. It was over a
yeah, I
year
was
ago.
trying to find it. I couldn't find it yet.
Yeah,
couldn't find it
I never
either.
delete anything, so just ask
you
me.
could also do like I'm just talking out loud here, but if you doubled it per meeting for all-day retreats or travel or something like that, maybe that's a $200 or $150, like something
Right.
bigger for an all-day retreat or out-of-town
Yeah,
travel.
the point is not for anyone to make money off of this. Really, what it is to offset the cost of actually being here when it takes time out of people's work and time out of people's pockets for babysitters. And I think the conversation we've had in the past is that we don't want this to be something that could prevent a willing person from being able to serve. So,
That said,
Mhm.
because they're a little bit competing ideas, but I think that we should consider tripling the per diem.
Mhm.
But I also think that we should look at, and this, I think, goes more to the equity point, that there's more that we can do in terms of compensating people for expenses actually incurred.
That's what I was gonna say. I think we could better define, like, what are the real costs, so that if somebody has to get a babysitter to cover a 5-hour meeting, that's a cost they could get reimbursed for instance, right? Like, we could delineate what those costs are much better, to make it much more clear.
And lost billable hours should definitely be one of them.
I also think there needs to be a penalty.
I second.
There also needs to be a penalty clause for if a meeting that goes after 9 PM, you
There you
get.
go.
I
You get
second
nothing.
that.
All right, on that note, do we have, wait, you guys are gonna bring forward a proposal, right?
Can we discuss this at the retreat on Friday? Would that be appropriate?
Yes.
Okay, I'll send it out.
In the meantime, we
tomorrow.
will go ahead and when we bring the new budget numbers to the retreat, we'll go ahead and just put in a triple just so we
Okay.
can see what it looks like and not be surprised later. But it's, I mean, even tripling is not gonna be a big impact on it, so.
We thought that was just why we couldn't find it in the budget, because it was so minuscule.
Yes, exactly. You need a magnifying glass. so.
Okay, let's move to,
David just pays it out of his bonus.
That's right,
Here, just
exactly.
give this to the board.
we have 4 minutes. Let's go to legislative updates.
Oh, till 9. Gotta get this done.
Do we have any of those?
We do have updates. I heard something happened with
Something
some
happened a
bill.
couple days ago.
Yes. I gave you a copy of the updated tracking sheet. Ooh. It's also attached to the agenda for others. So just so you know, the window for the governor to sign or veto bills ended May 12th. So the dust is still settling. We're still trying to figure everything out. But I think for the most part, we know what's happened. The bills that were signed by the governor are in green, and the bills that were vetoed or they were bills of interest that failed on the last day of the session are highlighted in red.
Oh, they do enrollment, cool.
So I'm going to highlight just 3 of them for you. So House Bill 83, that's the recess bill. This bill was vetoed. The governor's veto statement said, currently local boards of education hold broad authority to establish recess policies for students in kindergarten through 8th grade. This local control allows school boards to set these policies based on a thorough understanding of day-to-day educational operations, as well as regular interaction with administrators, educators, families, and students. House Bill 83 would dramatically restrict this local control, stripping long-held authority from school boards. While I support expanded recess opportunities for Georgia students, I am a firm believer in local control, especially in education. This legislation would impose unreasonable burdens on educational leaders without meaningful justification. that one was sort of a shock. We didn't know that one was coming. We heard when that it might be vetoed, but in the end, that it was actually vetoed. With that statement of local control was surprising. The really big surprise was the veto of Senate Bill 15, which is the school safety bill. And the statement for this one said, Senate Bill 15 is a well-intentioned piece of legislation, but many school superintendents, nonpartisan advocacy groups, and educators across Georgia have expressed concern over its provisions. These stakeholders agree that this legislation undermines local control, generates an unfunded mandate for school safety coordinators, and places a duty on school administrators that increases their exposure to legal liability. In stark contrast, House Bill 30, the 19 amended budget, allocates $69 million in school security grants to every public school and allows local leaders to decide how to use this funding for safer learning environments. So that's about, I think it's $30,000 per school, per public school in the state. The state will continue to invest in the safety of our children by working closely with local officials, parents, and students to ensure a safer, stronger Georgia. So this one was a big surprise to me. I don't know if it was a big surprise to everybody else that this one was vetoed, considering it was the governor's legislation. The last one was Senate Bill 48. That's the dyslexia bill. This one was signed on May 2nd. So I reached out to the DOE to see if there was any status update on this one.
Which one was it again?
Signed 48, second from the bottom.
Senate Bill 48. It's probably might be on the back.
Oh,
yeah.
it's signed.
Yeah,
Oh,
it was
I see.
signed May 2nd. And so I reached out to the DOE, asked them what's going on with this one, and they said that they have been talking about guidance, and they've also been talking and meeting about putting together an application process for districts to apply for the pilot program. So there was no timeline for communication of this pilot program and the application process yet, but we're going to be monitoring this one very closely. So those are the three I chose to highlight. Any other things?
Just wanted to comment on House Bill 444, the dual enrollment one. I ran
That one on
into
for you.
another, a number of our 9th and 10th grade student parents. One of them pointed out that one of the last revisions provided some type of a list of the classes that would be allowed to be taken. It became very, very small.
Oh, wow.
Based on the technical college offering, which would basically limit your dual enrollment choices to classes you can already find at high school. So this is one where I hope we can get some of these students and their parents involved next year, because this would directly affect our 9th and 10th grade population and take many of the dual enrollment options off the table for them.
So I heard that one before it was tabled on the last day, that the governor was interested in this one being handled through rule and not code. So a conversation with the technical college and DOE would probably be where you need to have that, share that information.
Well, it's all motivated by the fact that the dual enrollment program has grown so very quickly, and so it's a budgetary constraint. It's just how they're able to constrain the funds.
This is an old fight between the technical college and the DOE about funding and who gets the FTE dollars, and it's been around for a long time, and so I hope it gets solved soon.
Thank you for that report. I'm going to make one comment, and this goes back to Senate Bill 53, not about the substance of it, but the criticism that we have taken for the people upset by that veto have said that we didn't engage properly. It's somewhat ironic that the same people who have criticized us for hiring a lobbyist have directly told me that what you should have done, instead of hiring a lobbyist to veto the bill, is that if you wanted to be contacted, you should have had a lobbyist on retainer throughout the session and available to talk to us. So it's not, on the one hand, you shouldn't spend money on a lobbyist. On the other hand, I'm mad at you because you haven't spent much more money on a lobbyist. But the direct advice has been that if you don't want to get, do not expect us to give you a call, because we're not going to. If you want to be contacted and if you want to be engaged, we're not going to do it unless you hire a lobbyist to take my call. I've received this from more than one of our representatives. And I'm just putting it on the table that we need to think about that.
Well, and we can investigate that a little and add it to that list we bring for the budget, because I know DeKalb County spends $142,000 this year already on lobbyists, and so that's something we maybe want to look at in our budget of whether we need to budget money for lobbyists, because, you know, they spend 14 times what we spent, and maybe that's why what happened.
I'm really not suggesting we do that necessarily. I am telling you what I've been told and what the conversation has been, and that we should be thinking about what we need to do.
I'm just going to bite my tongue on all the things that I want to say, because I really appreciate all the work of the staff and the board on this, and the fact that we took the high road and we laid out the facts, and we did something that wasn't easy and wasn't something that anybody would have willingly gone out there and done if it weren't the right thing to do.
Cool. Thanks, Courtney.
Thank you, Courtney.
Okay.
Property Tax Study Committee is the next item. Can I jump to that, please? So I inquired with the folks doing the Property Tax Study Committee, or study work for us last week, and everything is on schedule. What I did not have a chance to look was to double check the date of when we told them they had to have everything, but I talked to them on Thursday. On Friday was their weekly team meeting where they discussed the status amongst all of them who are working on it, and I asked them to reach back out to me if there was any change, and they did not reach back out to me, so I assume no news is good news, but last I checked, they had the data they needed and they were looking through it, so that's the only update I have on that.
Future dates?
Personalized learning, the conference in Westminster conference.
And so maybe we can discuss that. I don't think it'll be a long discussion, but we still have proposed a board
At this
retreat.
rate, we're gonna be at a 3-day retreat.
I'm saying, I know.
No, we can talk.
But so it's October what? 10?
It's in
early
October.
October
I can't
10th,
remember.
11th, or something like that.
Yeah.
I think the registration is open. I'm just,
Wanna make sure
something
we
I think
keep
that
an
we've
eye on it.
indicated.
9th, 10th, and
we wanna
11th.
do.
9th, 10th, and 11th, thanks, Heather.
I will bring the flyer to the retreat so we can make a decision. We can also make a decision on the June board meeting at that time. If you have not participated in the poll for June board meeting dates, please do.
Doodle? Louis, did you
I've
do
done
the
it,
doodle?
thank you. And I had already done it.
I think
The
Annie-
new one.
Annie may not
Today?
have been able to do it.
Oh, okay.
Have we all?
So,
A new one
What's it out today?
Oh,
I've not done it.
I'm doodled out.
Annie, did
so
you do the
let's
doodle?
just do this.
I
Bring your
haven't done
calendar to the
Okay.
retreat on
Okay.
Friday,
And
and we'll either stick with the date we had all along, or we'll pick a
Right.
new one,
We're
okay?
not leaving until we have a date.
Exactly.
So we had
That'll be your exit ticket, like
Yes.
they do for the kids.
Just FYI, we have a new procedure that we're going to do our executive sessions in advance of the meeting rather than following for a number of reasons. So we had one earlier to discuss personnel, and therefore we don't need one now. And this meeting is adjourned.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
9:04.